Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
How you doing, my uncle?
I'm good, Rehan. How's you?
I'm good. I'm good. So for anyone that's watching, you're my uncle. We've known each
Yeah,
other our whole lives.
well, most of Rehan's life.
Not most of my life, yeah.
How's
So
things, Rehan?
everything's good, alhamdulillah. So a little bit about what you do and what your interests are, just for the benefit of anyone who watches this.
Well, to everybody I've never met, hello, salam. I hope you're all well. My name's Iftikhar. I am Rehan's uncle. Now, I know you couldn't probably tell. We'll just give that to the good moisturisers I use. Um, I'm a pharmacist by profession. I've had over 18 years experience within behavioural coaching, cognitive behavioural therapy, and just the communication aspects. I've always found that the bridge between what society is just now and spiritual practices that we have all been taught. There is a good correlation between the two. Unfortunately, I think the way time is nowadays, they seem to be more of a divide. But if anything, they can actually work quite well together. My work has involved working with people with anxiety issues and depression and mood disorders, motivation, confidence. And I've always implemented a multi-scope approach to it. When I say multi-scope, I mean from a medical background, having that approach from a cognitive understanding of the mind and behaviours, and obviously from a spiritual perspective as well. So thank you, Rehan, for inviting me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Speaking of your interest in behavioral and cognitive therapy and personal development, you massively started me on that journey as well. And it was with two books, which I still reference frequently. I don't know if you can see in the camera, we have two there, right where my fingers, we have Enjoy Your Life.
Ah, yeah,
That was one of the first books you gave me. And then if we go down to where the black books are, there's another one there. It says 59 Seconds by Professor Richard Wiseman. I think the author's name is
Richard Weissman. Yeah.
Richard Wiseman. So yeah, I think you massively influenced me going down this route. And this was about when I was like 16. You first gave me those books. And I think it was a very eye-opening experience. I think with going forward in life, we have, if you're not grounded and have an idea of what you are as a person, as a human being, as a man, what your responsibilities are, what you're capable of just changing your own thoughts, then you're going to take the stance of you're a victim of your circumstance. And it was through reading those first couple of books that kind of opened my mind to that idea. And furthermore, over the years, as I've collected more books, the themes and the experiences are different of all these authors, but it's the same recurring theme. That is, the body is the mind. Your life comes from your mind. Like if you have bad thoughts, if your thoughts are not optimized, if your well-being is not optimized, then continually uh, you're going to need to face with some consequences because of that. In the book, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, it says, a man will garner in the sweet and bitter fruitage of his own husbandry. So whether your thoughts are good and your actions are good, it's going to bear fruits and you're going to deal with those fruits. But if your thoughts are bad and your thoughts are impure and your diet's impure, uh, then likewise you're going to be dealing with the consequences of it either way.
That's a very good concept. Ultimately, it reminds me of a book. You probably heard of it. It's called The Secret, which is all about being able to
Law of
project.
attraction. Mm-hmm.
That's the word. The laws of attraction. And essentially, I found that book quite fascinating, not for the fact that it's telling you a new concept, but this is again a practice which has been taught for thousands of years.
Yep.
Where you assume the best of the circumstances, it allows you to be able to change your perspective on where you are. And not just to see problems or hardship or conflict, any of these things as a as a setback, but instead as an opportunity for your own growth, your brain's growth. One of the things we forget, Rehan, is the mind is like a muscle. Your brain, it needs that stimulus, and like any other muscle in the body, if you don't endure it with a certain level of stimulus, stress, and endurance, you can't expect it to grow. And with regards to what we were talking about, the laws of attraction, one of the things we were always taught, in Islam is your situation, should it be good, be thankful. Should it be hard and difficult, observe it with a beautiful patience, a beautiful sabr. Now, sabr is a very interesting concept. The first word that comes to our mind when we think of the word sabr is patience.
Sure.
But I think that's just one component of what sabr truly means. I was quite fascinated and also looked into it a bit more. And I think a more appropriate term would be sublimation. Now, sublimation in the medical context means when either a solid turns into a gas. That's the chemical terms for it. But on a psychological perspective, sublimation means to undergo and endure, but still moving forward. You're going through hardship. You're going through difficulties. You've gone through setbacks, but that doesn't stop you from keep going on. Now, keep going on doesn't necessarily mean you have to make massive leaps of achievement and success. Sometimes it just requires you to recalibrate yourself. And you touched on a very good word there, grounding. Sometimes we can't, if you're not grounding yourself to where you are in your life, then you'll never really be able to know where you're going, because it's like trying to hop to places when essentially you need to walk. And again, I come back to the laws of attraction. So ultimately, as a Muslim, we should always accept that whatever good I have around me, right, is a result of His blessing to me, and whatever bad I have to encounter is also part of His plan as well. But I will observe sabr, not just patience by sitting tight, but sublimation, by being able to understand that, look, whatever I'm going through right now, it's hard for me, and I know it's challenging, but I'll still keep going. Even if it's a small step, but you still keep going.
Yeah, well, I think you see this keep going forward. Like, you've really put it in nice words of, it's not so much what happens to you, it's how you deal with what happens to you. Before we actually started recording, we were talking about Jim Rohn, and he has a beautiful quote on it. He says, the winds don't decide on the destination of the ship, it's how you set the sails. So there's inevitably going to be unfavorable circumstances, but what holds us back is our mind and how we handle those circumstances. Speaking of the law of attraction and that The Secret, personally, I found that book to be really, I think some people bought into it and loved it, because what she was explaining something very complex in a really simple way. And when I first heard it, I thought it was like mysticism. When I first read that book, it felt like mysticism. But upon studying like other resources, I'd say As a Man Thinketh is a great book. Dr. Joy Dispenza talks about this in great depth. And even, trying to look at it from the Islamic perspective, it really does have grounding. There's another quote from the As a Man Thinketh is, man thinks that his thoughts are secret, but they are not, because your thoughts will develop into your actions, and your actions will shape your circumstance. So your circumstance is a direct correlation to what your thoughts are.
Absolutely. Your intentions. Remember, you have to have the niyyah to do something. When we go to pray, sometimes having the intention is not just thinking it and that's it. Mm-hmm. We have so many senses, our auditory senses, our kinesthetic senses, our sight. Mm-hmm. And fun enough, we've heard of the term positive affirmation.
Yeah.
or verbal affirmations where you look at yourself and you talk to yourself. Now, yeah, that can be, seen to be a bit insane. Why are you talking into a mirror? But again, there's wisdom within that as well. Sometimes our brain
Absolutely.
needs that verbal acknowledgement for our ears to be able to comprehend it.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of the most beautiful things I thought, I used to get asked, and I used to wonder this myself. I says, when I'm about to go to pray, I know what I'm reading. I know what I'm going to be praying. Why can't I just say it in my mouth and then just do it? But the beauty of what our faith has also taught us is when you're doing the initial intention of prayer, you have to verbalize it. You have to verbalize it. I am intending to pray 2 rakat, 4 rakat, whatever it is, facing the direction of Kaaba, with the intention of praying for Allah. Allahu Akbar. And
Absolutely.
you've just made your intention to commit to a commitment of conversation with our Lord.
Oh, sure. See that setting intentions. I think it's our religion. Like everyone kind of knows about, well, Muslims anyway know about the intention of when my intention is to pray the 4 rakat of Asr in the direction of the Kaaba. But there's other places such as before we go to sleep, we're supposed to say my intention is to wake up to perform the Fajr Salah. When you go to the bathroom, my intention is to rid my body of any impurities. When you're doing wudu, my intention is to purify myself, to earn the closeness and please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I'd say there's a beauty in doing that for everything. When you're going to work out, you're not just working out. Your intention is to grow into the strongest version of yourself. You're training to be a better person than who you were before the workout. When I'm teaching a student, my intention has to be to educate that student so they're more knowledgeable, so they've been uplifted or they've received value from that lesson. And speaking of affirmations, I have this one student, he inspires me. I won't say his name because I don't have his permission, but it's an elderly gentleman from Italy, 70 years old. And see, when I see him, he is full of so much energy. He is just he has so much, he's constantly smiling. 70 years old, he's moving his arms when he talks, and he has so much energy in his body language. And this guy, he goes for an 8-kilometer, he likes this brisk walk every single day. He plays tennis 4 times a week. He eats a healthy diet. He talks to me about the good relationship he has with his wife. And every day when he wakes up early. He shaves his face every morning. He has a shower every morning. He comes to the lesson because he's learning English, and he'll be dressed properly in a shirt, everything. He's looking really nice, really well dressed. And he tells me, see, when he gets out the shower, he looks in the mirror and he says, "You can do it. You got this." He says it makes him feel happy. And to someone who's uneducated in that, you think, this guy's nuts, but there's such a beauty and this guy has aged so gracefully. SubhanAllah, he's really kept that. And I really see there being a beauty in these affirmations, because see, whether you're conscious of affirmations or not, you do say them. There are things that you believe about yourself, whether you admit to it or not, because some people will think thoughts like, I could never marry a girl like that. I can never be rich. Of that Lamborghini, I never have something like that. It's like, where did you get this information from? Why are you? It's true because you believe it. You're telling these are. Is it still an affirmation if it's negative? Could you say a negative affirmation, or is it a different word?
Negative talk, yeah.
Is it appropriate to say negative affirmation, or is affirmation a connotation of that's positive?
Affirmation is just confirming something.
Okay, well, that's what I mean. So these people, whether they're conscious of it or not, whether they're literally exercising and practicing it, they will be doing some kind of affirmation. They will believe some thoughts about themselves. And if you're not actually looking on that and controlling it, you run the risk of saying and believing things about yourself which are counterintuitive to your goals in life and to your highest calling.
Funnily enough, you're talking about verbalizing our affirmations and having a negative intention or a positive intention, and what kind of impact that has. It's funny, I know it's digressing perhaps, but it's a very interesting study about the living properties of water. And they found, funnily enough, if you had, let's say, I think what they did was they examined with a glass of water, and they just spread cursory words, abusive words. And they had another glass of water where they just praised it. And I think one of them were, they were playing ayahs of Quran or the Adhan. And then what they did was they observed the actual molecular level of these water crystals, that the actual particles of water. And even the layout of the crystals of water was different.
Oh my God.
We're just talking.
Subhanallah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what they found is that, where it was cursory or very negative, the lattices, they were all just very, very chaotic. And whereas
Wow.
the other one, it was a bit more, organized and settled.
Wow. That's crazy. See, just for the benefit of anyone watching and for my benefit, because I want to see that, where could we find that? Where could we find that study?
If you go online and you check the living properties of water, there's quite a few people who have done practices on this. And I just found that quite fascinating. And again, coming back to that topic of, verbalizing your intentions, it's not just verbalizing it vocally. One of the things I've always encouraged people is, if you really want to make a change with your life, you need to write your intentions down.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. For some of us, verbalizing works. For some of us, having a big pin board with a message you want to see, you can do it. Right. Anything that's positively affirming. And it was just funny, I was saying, as you were talking about this, and we were just prior, we were talking about, if someone is enduring a very hard time and they think that their intentions are right and they're positive, but there's a very there's a very important thing, which is tawakkul Allah, having trust in Allah, that His plan is greater than our plan. And sometimes we can be put into circumstances thinking it is the best thing for us, and it doesn't work, or it causes more problems. And at that moment in time, we start thinking, oh, why me? I'm so unfortunate, etc. God doesn't like me. Oh, I'm just damned. But sometimes you're put into that circumstances not to teach you a lesson, but perhaps to readdress your own limitations, your own faults, your own perspective, perhaps. Because sometimes our ego gets so much better of us, where we assume we know we're in control of our lives, etc. Yeah, we are, to a limit. But ultimately, the plan is with Him. And our sole intention should always be being able to do what I need to do with attaining the pleasures of Allah, and Allah knows best. So faith, faith does require us to be able to understand that, certain things are out of my control. But within this, there is a lesson for me. And again, sorry, Rihanna.
No, it's cool. No, keep going.
One of the things I always say to people is, if you have a situation which happens, then there's three things you need to observe, right? One, where was my intention? Where was my thoughts? What were my responsibilities, and why the circumstances were the way they were? In that case, then, it's a self-correcting issue. But you need to be open and honest with yourself. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, very interesting quote, he said, it takes a lot of courage to be, what was it again? Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to be honest with yourself and critical of. Honesty is a virtue upon us all. That's the word.
Say that
again. Honesty is honesty and courage is a virtue upon us all. And I just went a step further and I thought to myself, it also takes a lot of courage to be honest with yourself as well. So you're not always right. You need to accept where you may be wrong in a circumstance. Now, once you can address your own limitations where you were responsible for it, and if you know that your intentions were correct, you did everything right, then understand, well, then the circumstances is perhaps my test to see how this is going to pan out. And then you need to recalibrate your intentions and think, right, small steps, learn a bit more. You know how they say sometimes a little bit of knowledge for somebody can make them feel as though they're the most enlightened, intelligent person in the world. But the irony of it is, there's a person who has more knowledge addresses the fact how little I actually know.
Amazing. Yeah, man. Really good points you touched up on there. And I'm just thinking there's so many different places I could take the conversation next. But the point that I think I'm going to go with is, see, like you've been talking a lot about religion, and particularly what I think is of benefit is when it comes to handling hardship, and well, what benefit that has been for you and I. See, a lot of people who don't have that, they risk going through hardships and thinking that their life just sucks, and that there's not a lot of positive things for them in life. And I read this article not too long ago, and I spoke about it in my last podcast with Dr. Lavan. And the article was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like, in the UK, they did like a study of a fairly large sample, and they found that 75% of the people between the ages of 16 and 35 believe that their life has no purpose. And furthermore, having religion is a psychological defense against subversion, against any negative affirmations, against nihilism. And I see this is where a lot of people are struggling with depression. I mean, here in the UK, I think like a quarter of the population suffers with a mental health ailment, suffer with like anxiety, they suffer with depression, they suffer with some kind of, related condition. And of course, like I don't want to undermine the benefits of the drugs, such as antidepressants. I'm sure it has there's certainly a use for it. Certainly, probably some people need it. I'm not really educated on that, but I think a lot of people, what they have is a spiritual problem. And what the reason that I've kind of come to that is I have a close friend, and he was atheist most of his life. He was born into a really strong Christian family, but their practices were just like completely backwards to him. Then he went most of his life being atheist. Then maybe 2 years ago, he became agnostic. And then in the last year, he became Christian. And now that he's more grounded in his belief, he's kind of went full circle. His mental health is in the strongest place it's been. His skin looks better. He's put on weight. He's not taking antidepressants. What's your thoughts on that with people who don't have spirituality, and maybe they're looking towards drugs or women or the next movie or the next party, and that's how they're fulfilling themselves, rather than when the answer to their ailment may actually be spiritual or just their education?
The mental health aspect of medicine, antidepressants is a massive market. The number of options you've got there for antidepressants, you've got different types. We have what we call serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, monoamine oxidase, all these things. And essentially what they're trying to do is manipulate or hijack, probably not sounding very positive of my medical practices, but yeah, essentially what they're doing is they're manipulating your brain chemistry for you to be able to not respond neurologically respond to whatever circumstances you're in. In a way, they kind of just dampen you down, they're dampening your nerves down. And at the same time, anxiety, which is considered to be an uncontrolled circumstances where your heart starts to beat fast, your muscles are starting to get tighter, your vision starts to become a bit hazy, your head becomes lighter. Anxiety is always understood to be a protective mechanism. It was within us to help us protect against a threat, whereby you have what we call the fight or flight mechanism.
Yep.
You either ran or you fought it. And there's also
cortisol.
cortisol is the hormone that causes that, surge for you to get primed for that. So essentially what happens is anxiety is always, unfortunately, anxiety now is perceived as a bad thing. And one of the things I've always said to people is it's not a bad thing. If you look at all these people that are very talented in the world, especially in the line of sports or high functioning activities, you will find that their cortisol level, their stress levels, their adrenaline levels are operating at a much, much, much higher level than everyone else. Adrenaline, it sharpens your senses. What we conceive as hazy vision, if you actually channeled it the right way, it allows you to be able to see something a bit more acutely, a bit more clearly than anyone else would be able to do that. Which is why if you find F1 drivers who, if you and I were to, let's just imagine, all right, so you and I driving an F1 car, we know what it's like at 30 miles per hour. We know what it's like at 60 miles per hour. Now, this is just a straight road. We know what it's like at 100 miles per hour, and it's scary. It's scary. Now, imagine that at 200 miles per hour. Imagine that at 250 miles per hour. Now, what's going on there? To you and I, if we're driving a car 200 miles per hour, all we'll see is...
Yeah.
Right, but your F1 driver, they've primed the stress response to so much adrenaline surge in their system so quick that now their brain is starting to pick up more.
Slow things down.
Yeah, it speeds up the brain's response, or for us to process it slower. And when you look at talented sports people, especially footballers, you'll always say they can see an opportunity that no one else can see. Well, what is that opportunity? It's that perception, it's the clarity of being able to see something that our average eyes cannot. And essentially, that's our brain chemicals, adrenaline, cortisol, that allows us to be able to think, right, oops, I can see that better. Unfortunately, I mean, this is my understanding of it. One of the greatest boxers of all time, Muhammad Ali. He was. If you ever watch his videos, it's as though he's already seeing what's going on before the punch is even thrown. His adrenaline spikes, his cognition was so sharp that he was able to see the smallest details and intercept the punches coming to him. But then as a result, and he was also very quick in the tongue, very articulate. That's one of the things you have to admire about him. He wasn't just quick in the ring, he was quick in in a conversation as well. But unfortunately, our body and our brain can only sustain that so long if we don't find an appropriate channel for it. And as a result, it has a detrimental effect on our mental well-being as well. And with regards to depression and anxiety, one of the things I always say to all patients, whoever I deal with, I'll say to them, look, anxiety is not your enemy. It's there to protect you. It's there to help you. The fact that you have this normal function working within you, it's a good thing. It's there to help you. Now what we need to do then is figure out a way how we can channel that. And essentially, when we have an anxiety attack, like it says, what's the first thing that happens? Breathing gets shallow, muscles get tense. What's that telling you? What that's telling you is you've not got enough oxygen in your system as well. So for that moment in time, stop, slow down, just stop, ground yourself. Let that fresh oxygen get back into you. Let your brain realise that, hang on, right now, my life is not under danger, it's not under threat. Let's physiologically control our bodies so then we can then allow our mind to come back on track, feel a bit more grounded. Yeah, so unfortunately, the perception of mental health and depression and all these things is, I think it's taken for granted. Now the terms, I suffer from anxiety, I suffer from depression, have become so normalized.
It's almost like there's Jim Rohn touches on this as well. I don't want to misquote him because I can't remember exactly what he said, but oppression and like these kind of things. It's in today's society, it's like virtuous to go through it.
Yeah, it's become like, I suffer from this, I suffer from that. And unfortunately, we start giving ourselves labels as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you can't expect, one of the things is you can't expect everyone to perceive whatever labels we have the way you do, I do, or they do. Some people, unfortunately, like to feel a bit more sympathetic and sorry for themselves. Some people like to feel that, you know what, there's a justification for it. But again, it comes down to sabr. It doesn't mean that we are complacent about whatever our circumstances are, and that means we don't need to do anything about it. It means that, wait, let me just try to recalibrate myself again, especially if I want to change. And like any other muscle, the brain is like the body and any other muscle. If you don't give it the opportunities for it to grow, i.e. put it under a bit of pressure, then it will never really grow. Slam, sorry about that, Rehan.
No, it's all right. It's all good. It's all good. Where did we leave off? We were talking about sabr, I think.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember this, but I remember I had just left high school at this point in my life. And this is just when you'd introduced me to some of those books that I mentioned at the beginning. And at this point, I was just going to college. And at that point, I didn't have a lot of qualifications. So I was doing a course that I just wasn't passionate about, just to get some qualifications. I had no idea what the future held for me. And you had kind of introduced me to this personal development stuff. And I'd say to a large point, it's actually influenced what I'm doing now. Because with teaching English, it's not just teaching English. Like one of my students told me recently that like he's an advanced English speaker. He's been speaking for like 15 years. But he told me that 10 years ago, he was trying to speak English to these two English speakers. And the two English speakers said to him, just stick to Polish. You're embarrassing yourself. He says 10 years later, with all the practice, all the tutors he's had, he says he still feels that burn of that comment they said to him 10 years ago. So, and the fact is, no English teacher can teach you so much grammar or so many words or so many phrasal verbs that you can forget that comment. That's another issue. And I feel like this, like development stuff, it goes so well with learning another language, like this personal development and education and putting yourself in new circumstances. There's a lot of parts that you're not going to get in a grammar book that's going to turn you into a confident speaker. These go hand in hand. So I just wanted to remind you, you had this business idea, and at the time, I don't know how passionate you were about it, but you told me about it when you gave me the first book, and I got really passionate about it. And you had an idea for this business called Momentum Coaching and Consultancy Services.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that?
It was quite a clever choice but the choice of word was momentum. It's carrying a burden or a weight and still moving forward with it. And I think essentially that's what it is. We're all carrying some sort of burden, some sort of weight, something that's maybe just holding us back. And just being able to give yourselves that little push to be able to move forward. And I find it quite fascinating, that colleague you were just talking about, who those words, stick to Polish. And they did burn into you. And I was of a very similar situation around when I was around the time of 16 or 17. And it was my physics teacher who said to me, you have a speech impediment. Now, at that point, I'm the cricket team captain. I was on my way to achieve the Ducks Awards at school, and I was quite a sociable person as well. Quite a good social standing. And I asked myself, I'm thinking to myself, can I have a speech impediment? And he broke it down for me. It's like he put the seed for what I needed to do or what I needed to understand, and it just kept burning me. I thought, what is it? What does he mean I've got a speech impediment? What does he mean? And I had to consciously become aware of it. And that's essentially, I think, the requirement for any form of change. You need to consciously acknowledge what your limitations are, what your problems are, for you to be able to then deal with it or work with it. And that was from the age of 16, 17. I focused and concentrated so many efforts on just understanding the principles of communication. And a very interesting book I started reading at that point was Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and
Influence People.
Yeah. Influence people. Now at the time, you can only understand so much from it, but it got the ball rolling. That maybe the issue is not what I'm trying to say, or it's more so being able to compose myself so that I can say what I want to say. And that's the one thing I used to say to you. My teacher said was, you know what you want to say, but you have a weird way of actually trying to convey your thoughts. And you can't do that unless you have some sort of acknowledgement of your limitations and then correct it, fix it. And essentially that's what the principles of most of my coaching has been, is you need to have self-awareness.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think self-awareness is one of the key components for any form of change. Ultimately, remember when I said to you, in order to know where you want to go, you need to know where you stand. So you need to know where your ground level is.
Yeah, I had no idea that you had a speech impediment. I didn't know that story.
Yeah, it's a funny one.
If you don't mind me asking, what was the impediment? Was it like pronunciation or?
It was actually, I used to mumble a lot.
Ah, okay.
Right. So when it came to talking about something, it's like that typical scenario when you're talking to somebody and, as soon as you start, they ask you, oh, repeat that again, please. And then you start becoming more self-conscious of it. But for me at the time, it got so bad that suddenly when I'm trying to repeat what I'm trying to say, my mind would go blank. And I always tried to figure out why can I do it? Now, one of the ways I tried to deal with it was things that I wanted to say, I wrote them down. And I've had a journal since the age of 15, 16. Things that I've always wanted to say, I write them down. And that's important because writing down has got its own wisdom as well, because writing down has neurological changes within your brain of what you want to, how your dialogue is going to be going as well.
Oh, I completely agree with that.
So at that point, I was very distraught. I was very upset. I thought, thinking to my teacher, you're meant to be my friend. You're meant to guide me. And I was, disappointed. But then later on, you realise, hang on a second, that little nugget of criticism was actually what I needed.
Yeah, sure. I just want to touch on writing things down. See whether you're angry or you're stressed or you're anxious, or you just want to write down something you want to happen. Whatever it is, see when everything's inside your brain, it can get very clouded and hard to see forward. But see when you just write everything down, you can see all of the things that are bothering you. And when it's tangible, it's not so formidable anymore because you can see it, you can hold it, you can score the things off one by one, and you know what you need to do to handle them. They're not just like, oh, if I don't do this, then this is going to happen, then this could happen, then this could happen, and that other thing, and then these things together. And it just clouds the whole judgment. So from giving you clarity perspective, yeah, I think it's excellent. But additionally, we were talking about affirmations. And again, it's not enough to just think you're a confident person. You need to stand confidently, you need to talk confidently. It's not enough to have this goal for the future. You should really write that goal down. Recently, I've been on the whiteboard behind me. I call it free affirmations. So sometimes I'll have something will occur to me in the day, or something will stress me out, or something will bother me. And there was a time a couple of weeks ago, and I got a couple of rejections from a few different things I was trying to do. And I heard from Jim Rohn. He said, well, it's nature. After rejection, there's acceptance. After night, there is day. After recession, there's expansion. So it was really natural. And that was something I wrote down that day. And when I wrote that down, that allowed me to feel better. But sometimes I just write it freely, and I just write random words. And I tell my students to do this. And one of my students is a 16-year-old boy that I'm kind of mentoring. And I told him that I write like things like affirmations behind me every day, and he says, "Oh, can I see what you're writing?" And I'm cool to show people what I've written. But on this occasion, because it wasn't something planned and it wasn't something, sometimes I think it's planned and it's poetic and it sounds nice. But on this occasion, I was just writing random words, and I turned around and I really like, I told him what it said, but I was kind of embarrassed to tell him because it was like really stupid words. It was just words like words that I just thought sounded cool, like strength and love, expression. I think I wrote, this is so cheesy, so cheesy. I wrote live, laugh, love. I think it's cheesy when I hear that, but for some reason, those words, live, laugh, love, that day, those words just correlated with me. And when I see people have that in the bathroom, live, laugh, love, I think it's cheesy. For some reason, I wrote it. He says, "What did you write?" I turned around, I said, "I wrote live, laugh, love." And he's looking at me like I'm so cheesy. And I was like, "Yeah, I know how it looks. I know how it looks."
Well, Ryan, you've just hit a very good point, which is sometimes we need to, if we've got positive messages, right, reaffirming them in the written way is good because it allows us to, get onto paper, look at it impartially. I equally believe that sometimes certain thoughts, negative talk, which is circulating within our minds as well, we've always said, having a friend to talk to is good, letting your problem vent. And at the same time, what tends to happen is you'll have this dialogue, you have a conversation with either yourself or somebody that you're wanting to talk to. Now, as a mechanism of protection, what happens is we try to remember, our brain tries to remember it to either protect us. But the thing is, that dialogue that you're having or wanting to have with somebody can circulate so many times. Now, let's just imagine it. Let's say you've got the dialogue and it's just, that's how small of an emotional effect it's having on you. But by the time your brain has processed it so many times, that grows. And as a means to protect yourself, we end up trying to remember the dialogue on a subconscious level. But unfortunately, we also remember the emotions that come with it as well. And this is why I've always said, sometimes get out on paper, get it out of your head. Because in that way, your brain doesn't need to think, right, now I need to remember. I don't need to remember it anymore. I've written it down. If I need to go back to it, I can always go back to it. But the benefit of that as well is that the emotion that comes with remembering that dialogue or conversation, thankfully, it's just transferred onto paper as well.
You touched on another. Sorry, go ahead.
No, fire away.
Well, I was just going to say, you made a really. Are you sure you don't want to make your point? Because I'm going to go on another tangent.
That's all right. Tangents. Okay. This is what we're all about.
Okay, cool. So you made a good point about there being the thoughts and the feelings being related to each other, and you're actually building neural pathways in your brain. So if you practice anger, you think angry thoughts and how other people anger you, and then you start to feel angry, and that causes you to think more angry thoughts. The more you practice that, you can just be walking down the street and someone does something to anger you, and you go from neutral to really angry because your brain has done that journey so many times that it's really easy for the brain to go down that journey. And unfortunately, a lot of people have built, in fact, inevitably, we all have, to some degree, myself included, have built unhealthy neural pathways in which we practice negative emotions. And just a resource for anyone who's interested is the book Chimp Paradox by Professor Stephen Peters, or Dr. Stephen Peters, I think. And in that book, he talks about the three parts that are involved in decision making, which are the human, which is like our kind of rational, conscious mind, which is in alignment with our goals, our aspirations, and our ego. Then we have the chimp mind, which is the emotional mind, which is much stronger. It reacts faster, and that's a part that I think it's in the limbic brain that comes from. So like you can't out rationalize your emotional desires because they're too powerful. There's other ways you need to do that. Then the other side is what he calls the computer. Another note in this book, I really like it because he's explaining complex psychology with terms like the chimp, the human, and the computer. It's really easy to understand for anyone who's interested in it. But the computer is like our experiences. And for example, if you went to the if you were feeling ill and you went to the doctors and the doctor said, "You're an idiot, you're wasting my time. Don't come back here for something like that," then you go to the doctors again and you have a similar experience, you're probably never going to want to go to the doctors again, because when someone says you should go to the doctors, that part, the computer, when that makes a decision, that's it's not the strongest, it's not the most rational, but it's the fastest It's based on experiences, and you have experiences of this being negative. So instantly you think, oh no, I'm not going to do it because I have bad experiences in the past. Like I've touched the fire before and I've been burned, so I'm not going to do that again. And I think a problem for that is when, guys start to think that they start to have a negative relationship with exercise, with communication, with public speaking, with essential communication, talking to the opposite gender, talking in interviews, talking in like giving presentations. Beyond communication, handling confrontation, that's another big one, where a lot of people have a negative relationship with that. I think, so one last comment on it. I've said this, I think, in all my other podcasts as well, because I think this is like being incorporated into my life philosophy, but I think exercise is a really good way of creating a good relationship with pain, because when you're exercising because one, it doesn't take a long time to see results from exercise. If you start exercising for a couple of weeks, you're going to see results, you're going to feel stronger, you're going to look better. But see, when you exercise and you go through pain and you see results, you start to like that pain because you know that pain means results. Like, see, when you're studying, like my students are learning a new language, like learning isn't always the most fun thing to do. At some points, it does feel like you're pulling teeth. But see, when you start being able to use new words and new phrases and say it naturally, and other people think, oh, well, look how good this person's English is. See, when you get that bit of a result, you've made a good relationship with studying, which is something boring. You've made a good relationship with training, which is something painful. Having good relationship with discipline, because you know on the other side of discipline is result. I think that's a really good relationship that I'd encourage anyone to build.
Absolutely. Discipline ends up, it allows us to be able to have a bit more control on our habits as well, because sometimes we base our actions or tasks that we need to do just on how our monologue is, how we're feeling inside. And discipline, it allows you to at least quieten that down for the time being, and then consciously make you aware, right, needs to be done, but more importantly, I can do it. And we were talking about that. Sometimes we can overanalyze. I might be digressing a wee bit, but because I don't want it to leave my mind, sometimes we can overperceive a situation, circumstances, where we get ourselves to a point where we are overanalyzing, and that causes paralysis. The term analysis paralysis. Sometimes we can perceive a situation to be a lot worse than what it is, a lot more difficult than what it is, or a lot bigger than what it is as well. And every so often, I think it's important just to remind yourself, well, you know what, small steps. If I can't do 100 push-ups, let me at least get to 10. Which brings us, I don't know if you're aware of the principles of Kaizen. It's a Japanese productivity tool where, if you're observing a task, call it, but in order to achieve or do that task fully, it causes too much of a stress response within us, which kind of discourages us to be able to pursue what we need to do. But if you can microsize it, then essentially, when you break it down, you do that small task, it's got a positive effect of causing you to feel a bit more confident in your abilities. Then you keep doing that, keep doing that, keep doing that. And because the brain's not perceiving that much change to be that drastic, eventually it starts to become a habit. And again, that comes back to developing a new discipline.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the word discipline itself, it just carries so much negative connotation to it that I think we need to reframe that word altogether and make it with discipline and control, or not make it sound as harsh. Because even now, sometimes discipline for me is, right, you're not allowed to do this. Yes, you have to do this. But instead, discipline should also be given its merit of it being a form of practice.
Sure. Of course. I really like that point you made about just like a little bit more, it's not jumps. And I recommended the book, The Way of the Superior Man, to you once. And in that book, he talks about the comfort zone, and he says, neither should we be right in the middle of our comfort zone where there's no stress, nor should we be so far out of the comfort zone that it's just stress and anxiety and you can't handle it. Like if this is your comfort zone, where you should be is like right here. You should be right in the border of comfort and fear. That's where you should live your entire life. That's what's going to cause continual growth. Now, I think you were talking at the beginning of this podcast. It's not so much about, honestly, it's kind of lost me what we were saying. But we were making, oh man, we've spoken about so many things today. I've kind of lost it.
Well, I do hope to continue these discussions, right?
Yeah.
I think what we're doing right now, Rehan, as well, Rehan, it's good to get it out there. And like I said, I'm really looking forward to working with you, to be able to break down so many chunkets of what challenges that we might have, because I think one of the things that I've always learned is my experience doesn't necessarily mean it's superior to yours, and my experiences doesn't mean I know everything either. So there'll be more people. I'm looking forward to meeting and just being able to discuss different viewpoints of different challenges, which will be an opportunity for me to learn as well, and yourself, to see what ways we can actually help each other as much as we can, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. We're just helping each other. Now you won't realise it, but I'm quite gracious, and I appreciate the fact that you feel I've been able to contribute and have such an input to your life in this way. But at the same time, I have to thank you as well, because it allows me to then think, well, everything that I've been doing as well, or maybe what I perceive what life was about, was I doing it wrong? And then thankfully seeing the success of young individuals like yourself, it's an affirmation for me as well. Thankfully, alhamdulillah, maybe I'm on the right path as well. And as a result, I expect you to be able to do the same with my kids.
Inshallah. Thank you so much for today's conversation. I really enjoyed it. I really hope people benefit from it, and I really look forward to the next one.
Inshallah. Thank you again, Rehan. Take care, and all the best.